Hi, I'm Kim Woodbury, Director of the Miami Valley Small Business Development Center in Dayton, Ohio. We've been getting a lot of questions from people who have received the PPP loans and want to make sure they're using them properly. So here's a review of the program as of 4/25/2020. We expect additional guidance concerning forgiveness, so be alert for that additional information. First, I want to remind you of the authorized uses of the PPP loans. The primary use of these loans is for payroll expenses. This includes wages, salaries, and commissions, and the costs related to the continuation of group health care benefits, including the insurance premiums. The major restrictions on payroll costs are that annualized salary amounts for any one individual cannot be over $100,000, and it cannot be used for employees whose principal place of residence is outside of the United States. Other approved uses are payments on any business mortgage obligation, not including principal payments or prepayments, rent, utilities, and interest on any other debt obligations that you incurred before February 15th, 2020. Okay, so let's quickly go over the consequences of using the loan for unauthorized purposes. You will be required to pay back any amount used for unauthorized purposes, and if it was an intentional misuse, you could be charged with fraud. Okay, one other note, the PPP application form requires certification that current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. So guidance issued on 4/24/2020 includes a safe harbor rule so that any borrower that applied for a PPP loan prior to the issuance of this regulation and repays the loan in full by May 7th, 2020 will be deemed by the SBA to have made the required certification in good faith. So I believe this addition is due to the reality that some large companies have received PPP funds who did not need it to support ongoing operations. And since this guidance is so new, I got some interpretation from the Holland & Knight website, and their insight includes that borrowers should take affirmative steps now to document their need. Collecting and maintaining records of the company's employee count and hour requirements, pre-COVID-19 operations and the subsequent decline, cost and access to capital, cash on hand, budget forecasts, and other metrics of financial performance will help to assuage the inevitable enforcement scrutiny down the road. It may make sense as a prudent practice to prepare an internal memorandum summarizing the nature of the current economic uncertainty, both current and foreseeable, that makes the PPP loan request necessary to support ongoing operations. Such an analysis might consider the consistency of current and future revenue from business activity, net assets of the business, and the availability of cash reserves, access to alternative sources of financing and capital markets, and how detrimental it would be to the company to access these alternative resources. This documentation of the company's justification for seeking a PPP loan, if current and accurate and complete, could provide help support the company's good faith basis for making the necessity certification if it's questioned in the future. So I have included the link to this guidance or this interpretation. And I do think it is a good idea to make sure that you're documenting your revenues versus 2019 revenues and any other issues that you're having. So documenting that will help protect you in the future, I believe. Okay, now we're going to move on to forgiveness. So the rules in a nutshell are that the loans are to be used exclusively for their intended purpose, They are to be used to offset no more than 8 weeks of eligible payroll expenses, and businesses must retain employees at salary levels comparable to before the crisis. We get a lot of questions about the employee levels, so I want to make sure I make this clear. Forgiveness approval will take into account both the number of employees and their salary levels. This means that you cannot ask for forgiveness for fewer employees than you listed when you applied for the loan, but increase their pay in order to qualify for the full loan forgiveness. I know employee retention is a big concern because many businesses were mandated to close due to the crisis. Employees can be hired back and put on paid leave using these funds. The purpose of the program is employee retention. Oops. Okay, so a little more detail about the forgiveness. The amount of the forgiveness will depend on total amount spent over the 8-week covered period, which begins on the date the loan funds are dispersed. 75% of the forgiven amount must be for payroll costs. The forgiveness can be up to the full principal amount and any accrued interest. So if you do not reach the required amount for loan forgiveness, you will be responsible for the principal and interest on any portion of the loan that is not forgiven. Payments can be deferred for 6 months, but the interest will still accrue during this period. Okay, so to apply for forgiveness, you'll need to document some things. So you'll need to document the number of full-time equivalent employees on payroll, dollar amounts of payroll costs, covered mortgage interest payments, covered rent payments, and covered utility payments. So the documentation that's accepted for payroll expenses are the Form 941 and state quarterly wage unemployment tax reporting forms. That's Form 941 of the federal from IRS, and the state quarterly unemployment tax reporting forms also. Or you can use payroll processor records corresponding to the 8-week period. So the forgiveness documentation for the non-payroll expenses are the covered lease and mortgage obligations and utility payments, the canceled checks, payment receipts, or transcripts of accounts, or any other documentation that verifies these payments. And part of the forgiveness, you'll also be required to certify that the documentation is true and correct, and that the money was used for payroll and other permitted uses. So again, they're asking you to verify that what you're using that for. Okay, so we have a list of frequently asked questions that we've gotten, and I wanted to address these. So what if I don't use 75% of the loan proceeds for payroll? So if you don't use 75% of those proceeds for payroll, you'll be responsible for the principal and interest on any amount that's not forgiven. The people who process the forgiveness is you apply to your lender after the 8-week period, and it generally takes and the decision is required to be given to you within 60 days of your forgiveness application. So if your funds are deposited in the middle of a payroll period, when do you begin counting? And it begins with disbursement of funds. So if it's in the middle of a payroll period, you'll need to do some prorating for that. Okay, so we've been asked if I work from home and take an office deduction, can I use PPP's mortgage interest allowance? Mortgage interest payments are allowed on any business mortgage obligation. So if it is a business obligation and you were able to deduct it in 2019 on your Schedule C, you may be allowed to take it. I'd pretty hard at that to make sure it fits under the guidance. I'm self-employed with no employees and show a loss on my 2019 taxes. Can I get a PPP loan if I took dollars from the company for healthcare costs? No. The loan formula for self-employed is based on 2019 net profit. So that would not be something you could get a PPP for. So if you have questions, please contact a small business development center near you. We provide no cost, one-on-one confidential advising on all areas of small business. In Ohio, if you are going to find your closest center, that is clients.ohiosbdc.ohio.gov. And if you're outside of Ohio and you're looking for the center close to you, you can go to America's Small Business Development Centers, or ASBDC, which is americassbdc.org, and put in your zip code and find the centers that are located closest to you. Okay, that's all for now. Take care and reach out to us if you have some questions. Thanks.